What if everything you thought you knew about Hollywood relationships was only half the story, or maybe even less than thought? Because when we talk about Hollywood stars like Johnny Depp, it always feels like the news is louder than the truth. Every story gets bigger, every rumor spreads faster. And somewhere in all that noise, the real person behind it gets harder and hard, or to see. And maybe you felt this too. Maybe you've seen the news, the clips, the social media fights, and thought to yourself, wait, what is actually real here? You're definitely not alone. So today, let's slow everything down. Let's talk about his love life in a simple, normal way. No hard words. No confusion. Just a clear and easy look at what people have talked about over the years. What people often get wrong. And why his story has stayed in the news for so long. And stay with him because there's a part of all this that most people completely miss. We'll get to that soon. Now let's start from the beginning. When Johnny Depp first became famous in Hollywood, he wasn't just another young actor. He quickly became known as Sumio Mysterious, someone who didn't really open up to the public, someone who kept his private life well. It's private, and that alone made people curious, because in Hollywood, when someone stays quiet about their personal life, people want to know even more. As he got more famous, more attention came to, not just on his movies, but his personality, his friends, and of course, his relationships. And that's where things slowly started to change. At first, it was just normal curiosity from fans. People were interested in who was spending time with. But over time, that curiosity turned into constant attention. And constant attention in Hollywood rarely stays simple. Every time he showed up somewhere, people started looking closely. Every photo got talked about. Every small rumor turned into a bigger story online. And before long, his personal life wasn't just personality. But here's something important to remember. Behind all of that attention is still a real human being. Someone dealing with feelings, trust, pressure, and real-life stuff, just like anyone else. And that's something people often forget when they only see headlines. As his career kept going, Johnny Depp got connected to big, famous relationships that naturally got even more public attention. And in Hollywood, when relationships become public, they didn't just stay between two people. They've become something the whole world talks about. Every moment gets watched. Every change gets noticed. And every small detail can suddenly become a big deal online. Others, where things get a little tricky. What we see in the news is not always the full story. Sometimes it's only one side. Sometimes it's exaggerated. And sometimes it leaves out the real feelings behind the situation completely. So the real question is, how much of what we hear is actually the full truth? And how much of it is just the version that spreads the fastest? That question has followed his story for years. Now let's talk about something people really think about. Imagine trying to build and keep personal relationships, while knowing that every moment could end up being talked about publicly. Not just by a few people, but by millions around the world. Think about how that would feel. Even a normal argument becomes something people pick apart. Even private feelings can become public debates. And even simple moments can be turned into agwisses. That kind of pre-sure dust just sit in the background. It affects how people talk. It affects trust. And it can make even simple things feel heavier than they really are. And from public talks and interviews over the years. Johnny Depp has hinted that fame can sometimes mess up how relationships look from the outside. Meaning what people think they see is not always what is actually happening. Behind the scenes. And that's a really important point, because it reminds us that what the public thinks and what's really happening are not the same thing. Now here's something else that adds even more to this tree. In Hollywood, relationships often get turned into simple versions of themselves. Almost like short stories, people want clear answers. They want to know who did what, who said what, and what it all means in the simplest way possible. But real life is never that clean. Real feelings are messy. Real conversations are complicated. And real relationships don't fit neatly in Tony's headlines or captions. And that's exactly why stories like his keep getting talked about for so long. Because there is always more going on under the surface than what people see. Over time, as people kept talking about Johnny Depp, another thing became clear. The pressure of being constantly watchado is to just change how the world sees you. It also changes how you live your own life. When everything you do is being watched or picked apart, even your private moments stop feeling completely private. And that changes how people talk to each other, how thieves show their feelings, and how they handle tough emotional moments. It's not just about being famous. It's about living with people always watching and guessing. And that's a heavy thing to carry. Now let's stop for a second and change a mood a little. Because here's something interesting that people often miss. Not everything in his story is about drama or problems, in fact. A lot of it is about lessons, growing as a person. In moments that change how he sees relationships and life in general. In past public talks and interviews, Johnny Depp has suggested that some of the most important lessons learned didn't come from being famous or successful. They came from personal experience. Especially relationships that were never fully understood by the public or never fully explained in the media. And that's a powerful reminder, because sometimes the most important parts of someone's life are the ones we never clearly see from the outside. And when you really think about it, that idea applies to almost everyone, not just celebrities. We all tend to look at people from the outside. We see what they post, what they say in interviews, or how they look in public. But we rarely see what is happening behind closed doors. The quiet conversations, the hard feelings, the moments of doubt or thinking that never make it into headlines. For someone like Johnny Depp, that gap between how people see him and who he really is becomes even bigger when a person is constantly in the spotlight. Every small detail gets blown up. Every relationship becomes something people talk about, and every misunderstanding can quickly turn into a public story. Thought feels way bigger than it really is. In that kind of world, personal lessons often don't come from cheers or success, but from the hard, private moments that no one else truly understands. That's why he has often been seen as someone who cares more about real, deep experience than about looking successful. Because being famous brings attention. Beauty doesn't always bring answers. In fact, it can sometimes make finding answers harder. When everything is being watched or judged, it becomes hard. I would separate what is real from what people are just assuming. And that's where people usually grow. Not in the loud moments, in the quiet ones. In thinking things over, in learning from mistakes, in understanding feelings that are complicated and not always easy to put into words. So when we hearth, some of his biggest lessons came from relationships that were never fully understood by the public. It's not really surprising. It actually shows us something very human, that the most meaningful parts of life are often the ones you can't see. Now think about that for a moment. How many times have we judged a situation based only on what we saw online? How many times have we made up our minds based on a headline, a short clip, or a single quote taken out of context? It happens all the time, and that's why stories like this one stay important. Not because they are simple, but because they have many layers. And the more you look at them, the more you realize how much is still a now. There are also ongoing conversations in entertainment news about how the way people see celebrities keep changing over time. As new interviews come out and new moments get shared, people often rethink what they thought they knew before. And that means story is never really over. It keeps going, it keeps changing, and it keeps starting new conversations. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a very human picture, not just of fame, but of deep feelings, of relationships under pressure, and of a person trying to live his life while being watched all the time. And that brings us back to something very simple. Behind every headline, there is always a real person. And behind every story, there are always layers that the public may never fully see. Now I want to bring it back to you. What do you think about all of this? Do you think Hollywood relationships can ever truly be understood from the outside? Or do you think we only ever see a small, edited version of the real story? Because honestly, the more you look at it, the more questions show up instead of answers. And that's exactly why stories like this keep people talking. If you found this breakdown interesting, you might also enjoy looking into other Hollywood Stories where what people think and what's really happening don't always match. There are always more stories like this. And each one adds another layer to how we understand fame and relationships. And if you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me through the full story. It means a lot. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep yet simple breakdowns of celebrity stories that go beyond the headlines. Because next time, we might uncover another story that changes the way you look at fame all over again.